Just a few miles beyond the northwest corner of the San Fernando Valley, high above Simi Valley, sits one of the most historically significant destinations in all of Southern California. It contains approximately 60 million personal and government documents, an actual presidential aircraft or two, a section of the Berlin Wall, and artifacts connected to one of the most consequential periods in modern American history. And yet many people who live nearby have either never visited it or have no idea how much there is to see once they walk through its doors. Hi, I'm Frank Spencer, Mr. Chatsworth, and today I want to introduce you to a new series, Hidden Stories of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library and Museum. And before we begin, let me tell you why this series is particularly important to me. I'm a volunteer at the Reagan Library, and it gives me the opportunity to meet visitors from across the country and around the world, and to share the history represented by the exhibits, the artifacts, documents, and the stories found throughout the museum. This series is not intended to tell you what to think politically. Whether you admired President Reagan, disagreed with him, remember his presidency personally, or simply enjoy American history, you're welcome here. My goal is to introduce you to an extraordinary historical destination sitting practically in our own backyard, and to share some of the details and stories that visitors can easily and often do overlook. Chatsworth itself sits at the extreme northwest corner of Los Angeles County and immediately adjacent to the extreme northeast corner of Ventura County. And it's just a short drive away there in nearby Simi Valley that the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library and Museum sits. The library occupies a spectacular 400-acre hilltop property with views extending across Simi Valley and on clear days all the way to the Pacific Ocean. And it's also the final resting place of President Ronald Reagan and First Lady Nancy Reagan. And for those of us who live in Chatsworth, Porter Ranch, Northridge, Simi Valley, or elsewhere in the greater Southern California area, this isn't some distant Washington institution. It's one of our most important local landmarks. The library was dedicated on November 4th, 1991, exactly 11 years after Ronald Reagan was elected president on November 4th, 1980. And the dedication itself became a historic event. 5 living United States presidents gathered in one place: Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan, and then President George H.W. Bush. And they were joined by First Ladies Pat Nixon, Betty Ford, Rosalind Carter, Nancy Reagan, and Barbara Bush, and Lady Bird Johnson. It was the first time in American history that 5 United States presidents had gathered together in one location for any reason. Think about that for a moment. 5 men who had occupied the Oval Office representing different eras, different political philosophies, and decades of American history standing together on a hilltop in Simi Valley. The ceremony was also attended by dignitaries, honored guests from around the world. It was an extraordinary beginning for an extraordinary institution. The library was designed and constructed with private funds that were raised by the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation. And upon completion, the presidential records and federal archival operations became part of the presidential library system administered by the National Archives and Records Administration, commonly known as NARA. The National Archives preserves and administers the official records of the Reagan presidency, and so the library is many things at once. It's a museum, it's an archive, It's a research institution, and it's an educational center, and it's a place of national remembrance. When most people hear the words Presidential Library, they may picture inside their head shelves filled with books, but presidential libraries, they're not traditional libraries. They preserve the raw materials of history. And at the Reagan Library, the archives include about 60 million personal and governmental documents, along with extensive collections of motion picture film, videotapes, audio tapes, photographs, private papers, historical gifts, and artifacts that are connected to Ronald Reagan's years as both governor of California and his presidential years. Some of these materials document events that simply changed the world, and others reveal the smaller, more personal details of life inside a governorship, a presidential campaign, and the White House. Together, they allow historians and researchers, students and journalists, and members of the public to examine the record and come to their own conclusions. You have to understand that's an important distinction. A presidential library does not simply preserve a polished version of history. It preserves the documents and images, recordings and gifts, the artifacts that help future generations study and interpret that history for themselves. Now, over the next few weeks, I want to take you inside some of the most memorable parts of the library. We'll examine a section of the Berlin Wall and talk about the history it represents. We'll visit the replica of the Oval Office and look at how the most recognizable office in America appeared during the Reagan presidency. We'll explore presidential transportation, state gifts, White House traditions, maybe the Secret Service, and some of the lesser-known details that visitors often pass by without ever noticing. We'll also talk about the library grounds, the presidential burial site, the spectacular views, and what first-time visitors should know before planning a trip. And because I volunteer here, I'll share some of the questions visitors ask most often, along with a few stories and details that may educate and surprise you. Now, it would be impossible to tell you the story of any presidential library without discussing politics, but this series will not be a weekly political argument. It'll be about American history, presidential history, the institution of the presidency, and an important destination located just a short distance from the valley. History doesn't require us to agree about everything. In fact, good history encourages us to look carefully, ask questions, consider context, and understand events more fully. Some viewers may remember Ronald Reagan with great admiration. Others may remember his presidency very differently. And for many younger viewers, well, they may know him only as a name from a history book, but all viewers are welcome. My purpose is not to tell you what judgment history should reach. My purpose is open the door to show you what's there and invite you to explore it on your own. You may be asking what a presidential library has to do with a channel that focuses on real estate, local lifestyle, neighborhoods in the San Fernando Valley. And my answer is simple. Real estate is much more than just houses. It's about communities. It's about the places people visit, the history that surrounds them, and the experiences that make one area different from another. The Reagan Library is part of that story of Simi Valley and the Northwest Valley region. It draws visitors to us from around the world, and it creates local jobs. It serves as a museum, a research facility, an educational institution, an event venue, and most certainly a historical landmark. And for those of us who live nearby, is part of what makes this corner of Southern California unique and special. My hope is that this series will do more than simply show you exhibits. I want it to help you notice the details. I want it to answer questions you may have had but never asked. And I wanted to give you a reason to visit the library yourself and experience this place firsthand. Some episodes will focus on major exhibits, others may just focus on a single artifact or a particular story, or something most visitors walk past without realizing its significance. And from time to time, I certainly will respond to your questions and suggestions. So this will not be my tour. It'll be our conversation. The Ronald Reagan Presidential Library Museum is located only a short distance from the San Fernando Valley, but history preserved there, well, it extends from beyond California and Washington to across the world. And I hope you'll join me in the weeks ahead as we explore its exhibits, artifacts, stories, and the history they represent. And I would like to hear from you. Have you ever visited the Reagan Library? Which part would you like most to see featured first? You tell me. Leave your answer in the comments because your suggestions will help me shape the episodes that follow. And if you enjoy local history, valley lifestyle, real estate, and the stories that make this part of the Southern California unique, please like, subscribe, and ring that bell. And until next time, I'm Frank Spencer, Mr. Chatsworth, and I'll see you around the neighborhood.